Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I see the clock at 11:01, and we're going to convene this meeting of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy, and Ethics. We're convened today to, pursuant to order, I'll find my documents here, pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, February the 12th, 2012, Bill C-520, an act supporting nonpartisan agents of Parliament. We welcome as our witness the sponsor of that bill, Mr. Mark Adler. Welcome, Mr. Adler. I understand you're one of the lucky members of Parliament whose private member's bill actually succeeded in passing its second reading, and it's been duly referred to this committee for your presentation and then examination by and testimony from witnesses, and ultimately a clause-by-clause analysis. So, Mr. Adler, the first hour of this meeting is dedicated to you. I hope you have opening remarks, and then we'll open it to questioners from the floor. Approximately 10 minutes, if you will, Mr. Adler.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it's an honor and privilege for me to be here today before the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy, and Ethics in order to speak on my private member's bill, C-520, an act supporting nonpartisan agents of Parliament. Now, the purpose of my bill is to improve transparency. Bill C-520 requires agents of Parliament and the employees in their offices to make a public declaration if they occupied a politically partisan position in the 10 years before their appointment. It also serves to affirm their commitment to conducting themselves in a nonpartisan manner while employed in these specific offices. This bill identifies 9 specific offices with unique responsibilities and roles. Given their specific watchdog duties, it is imperative that the so-called agents of Parliament are seen to be nonpartisan and free of political influence. At every step of the process in preparing a report or dealing with a case, from the selection of what to study to the research to the basic wording used, neutrality and independence must be maintained. Now, let me be clear. The intent of this bill is not to limit any person's ability or freedom to engage fully in the political process of Canada. Rather, the intent is to create a measure of trust and confidence in the neutrality and nonpartisan nature of the offices of the agents of Parliament. I submit that the proposed legislation will enhance the legitimacy of the agents of Parliament and make sure the public is aware of any professional partisan positions held by the agents and their staff. The 9 specific offices that my private member's bill focuses on include the Office of the Information Commissioner of Canada, the Chief Electoral Officer, the Office of the Auditor General, the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying of Canada, the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, the Office of the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner of Canada, the Office of the Senate Ethics Officer, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, and the Office of the Commissioner of Official Languages. These agents of Parliament are a sole group of independent statutory officers who serve to scrutinize the activity of legislators and the government. I submit to you that their office will only be enhanced by the public confidence Bill C-520 will provide. Now, all of the offices I mentioned report directly to Parliament rather than government or to an individual minister, and as such exist to serve Parliament in relation to Parliament's oversight role. The oversight role played by the agents is a crucial component of the balance and fairness of our institutions and the legitimacy of our Westminster style of democracy. It is critical that in carrying out their duties, the agents are independent of political affiliation. Neutrality in the office of an agent of Parliament is imperative to ensuring Canadians receive information in a manner that is clear and trustworthy. Mr. Chair, I would like to emphasize again that the special role the 9 agencies identified in my bill play in the democratic system. We already hold these groups to the highest standard of objectivity. We require them to sign an oath of impartiality, and we ask them to take measures to guard against partisanship, either real or perceived. Even the Chief Electoral Officer is even banned from voting in elections in order to maintain these standards. Bill C-520 simply suggests that given these exceptional standards, the agents and their employees should be required to disclose past or future partisan positions and continue to build transparency and openness into our democracy. To further promote transparency, all declarations from employees would be posted on the website of the office of the relevant agent of Parliament. The declarations would state whether, in the 10 years before applying for that position, the person occupied certain specified politically partisan positions. Such a declaration would also state whether these persons intend to occupy a politically partisan position while continuing to occupy the position of agent of Parliament or work in the office of such an agent. In addition, the bill would require an agent of Parliament and the persons who work in his or her office to provide a written undertaking that they will conduct themselves in a nonpartisan manner in fulfilling the official duties and responsibilities of their positions. Canadians said they wanted a transparent government, and time again, I am proud to say that our government has brought into force legislation that increases transparency and accountability. Our government brought Canadians the Federal Accountability Act. We reformed the Lobbying Act. We brought into force the Conflict of Interest Act that named the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. And our government eased the process of information disclosure, making it easier for Canadians to call to account their representatives. The number of records that our government released has increased, while the turnaround time has decreased. The numbers speak for themselves. Our government is committed to increasing government transparency and accountability. Now, Mr. Chair, this call for transparency and accountability is not something we can take very lightly. The statutes which created these agents of Parliament do not imply the need for impartiality. They demand impartiality. With great power comes great responsibility. If we look at some of the legislation about the agents themselves, the need for objectivity is clear. Section 15 of the Auditor General Act states, "The officers and employees that are necessary to enable the Auditor General to perform his or her duties are to be appointed in accordance with the Public Service Employment Act, and the provisions of that Act apply to those individuals and employees." The Act goes on to make explicit the call for impartiality. Before commencing his or her functions, a commissioner shall take an oath or make a solemn affirmation in the following form before the clerk of the Privy Council or the person designated by the clerk. Quote, "I do swear or solemnly affirm that I will faithfully, truly, and impartially, to the best of my judgment, skill, and ability, execute and perform the office of this Public Service Commission." Further to that, Section 23(1) of the Elections Canada Act states, "Before assuming duties, an election officer shall swear an oath in writing in the prescribed form to perform the duties of the office in an impartial manner. In addition, the Commissioners of Privacy, Conflicts of Interest, and Ethics, Information, Lobbying, Public Sector Integrity, and Official Languages are all deemed to be employed in the public service and thus are bound to the same oath found in the Public Service Employment Act when carrying out their duties." Now, Chair, I submit that the requirements found within my private member's Bill 520 expects from these agents the highest level of transparency and that they are already swearing to that in their oath. Moreover, they improve these laws by adding transparency and making all declarations available for the public to see. Legislation similar to my private member's bill exists in other Commonwealth nations. Take Australia as an example. The National Integrity Commission Bill 2013, Section 7(1)(a) provides any conduct of any person that adversely affects or could adversely affect, either directly or indirectly, the honest or impartial exercise of an official functions by Parliament, a Commonwealth agency, or any public official, or any group or body of public officials, and continues by prohibiting any conduct of a public official that constitutes or involves the dishonest or partial exercise of any of his or her official functions. Now, in conclusion, Bill 520 will enhance transparency. This bill is in line with our government's efforts towards transparency and accountability. I hope that the committee sees the value of my proposed legislation, and I believe we can all agree that this is an important step to strengthening our democracy. As U.S. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis has said, sunshine is the best disinfectant. Thank you.
I thought that was my line, but see, I've been plagiarizing all this time. Thank you, Mr. Adler, for that presentation. I know there's a lot of questions, and first for the official opposition, the New Democratic Party, Mr. Charlie Angus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Adler. Just recently, your colleague Pierre Poilievre insinuated that Elections Canada wears a team jersey, signifying that they do their work in a politically partisan manner. Have you any examples of the 9 agents of Parliament you described undertaking activities in a partisan manner?
Well, thank you, Mr. Angus, for that question. And you know, all my bill lays out is that These 9 agencies have a very special role to play in Parliament and in our parliamentary democracy. In fact, as I mentioned in my remarks, that even the head of Elections Canada can't vote. Now,
any examples? Has this been a problem? You say it's an imperative, and you refer to them as so-called agents of Parliament. They're actually agents of Parliament. They're not so-called. Do you have any examples? If this is so imperative, you should have some examples where, other than your attack on Mr. Mayrand or your colleagues' attack on Mr. Mayrand, where have these agents of Parliament acted in a partisan manner?
Well, Mr. Angus, I'm trying to answer your question if you'll give me the time to do that. What I'm telling you is that my private member's bill will enhance transparency and accountability. These special agents of Parliament hold a very special responsibility in our parliamentary system. And
So
all I'm
you
trying
don't
to
have
do
any
in this
examples?
private member's bill.
So, well, I'll continue on. I only have 7 minutes, so you don't have any examples. Now, partisan activity is already prohibited under the Public Service Employees Act, but what's not included that would be different in your bill is the ability of members of Parliament or the Senate to demand investigations against these agents of Parliament. So your colleague, Mr. Panashaway, had to resign in disgrace because of investigations by Elections Canada. If your bill became law, would it have been possible for Mr. Panashaway to demand an investigation into whether Elections Canada was unfairly picking on him? Would that suffice under Section 9 of the Act?
Well, Mr. Angus, you know, quite frankly, I'm not here to comment on other members of Parliament and what they have or have not said. What I'm here to talk about is my own private.
No, but I'm
bill,
trying to
Bill
understand
520.
the bill here. So, okay, let's say Cabinet Minister X is under investigation by Elections Canada. Cabinet Minister X thinks, or say Parliamentary Secretary X says, I feel violated and betrayed by an agency in which I and every other member of this place, indeed, which all Canadians must place their trust. I feel strongly that this process has been conducted, this process being an investigation by Elections Canada, with malice and contempt for me as a member and for my family's well-being. Furthermore, say person X, Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, former Parliamentary Secretary, says it's a breach of his privilege being investigated for abusing the electoral laws of Canada. Under your Act, he'd be able to make a complaint, would he not? Because right now, Mr. X, Mr. Dean Del Mastro, is unable to make that complaint, but under Section 9, he'd be able to make a complaint. Am I correct?
Well, let me just tell you, Mr. Angus, that once again, the purpose of my bill is to bring.
Just answer the question. Will he be able to? Tell me, does he have the power to do that? I read your bill. I want to know, in your opinion, does Member X, Mr. Dean Del Mastro, who feels that his rights were abused by being investigated by Elections Canada, would be able to launch an investigation against Elections
Mr. Angus,
Canada?
I'm not here to comment on specific cases. What I'm here to talk about is my bill, Private Members Bill 520. Now, what I'm telling you is that these agencies hold a very unique role in our parliamentary system.
I understand.
But let me just tell you.
So transparency, Mr. Adler. I like your word transparency. Now, under Section 10 of your Act, these agents of Parliament, after having been called out by one of your colleagues, must submit a report to Parliament. Now, under this, so when Mike Duffy, your colleague Mike Duffy and your colleague Nigel Wright were being accused of fraud and bribery, it was handed over to the Ethics Commissioner, but the Ethics Commissioner had no power to investigate Mike Duffy because he was a senator. However, Mike Duffy, tell me if I'm wrong, under Section 9, if Mike Duffy was still sitting senator, Mike Duffy would be able to demand an investigation of the Ethics Commissioner, even though the Ethics Commissioner couldn't investigate Mike Duffy. Is that not correct?
You know what, Mr. Angus, this bill will protect all members of Parliament. This is not a partisan
No, but you
bill.
understand this bill,
is
so
even
you
here
should be
to
able to explain.
this
Would
is-
Mike
this is-
Duffy have been able to demand an investigation of the Ethics Commissioner, because the Ethics Commissioner doesn't have the power to investigate Mike Duffy?
Mr. Angus, I'm here to talk about not specific incidents. I'm here to talk about my bill.
Okay,
And
so
my-
transparency. I like your word transparency. So the Conservatives, our colleagues on the other side, have just brought changes to the Conflict of Interest Act, and they're very worried about vexatious investigations. In fact, what they're saying is that when your colleagues, your fellow cabinet ministers, parliamentary secretaries, are investigated for, lobbying, taking money inappropriately, that those investigations must be kept secret by the Ethics Commissioner. That's what they're calling for the conflict of interest changes. I don't see any obligation for this to be kept secret when one of your members wants an investigation against a member of Parliament. Why or against an officer of Parliament, why wouldn't you have the same protection that your colleagues are putting in for cabinet ministers? Wouldn't you think it'd be fair if you, for example, decide to make a vexatious complaint against the ethics commissioner, that it would be kept secret until it's being discussed? So I want to know why, in transparency, it's fine for you and your colleagues to attack officers of Parliament, but officers of Parliament have to keep their investigations against your colleagues secret.
Well, you know,
why is that missing?
Yeah, no, I'm not here to talk about other pieces of legislation, other proposed legislation.
But don't you think it would be good to have that to protect against vexatious complaints?
This is to protect all members of Parliament, not just any one particular party. So when a member of Parliament or a senator suspects that a member of one of these agencies acted in a partisan manner, they can request of the head of that agency to conduct an investigation.
But you haven't given us any example other than the attack on Mark Merritt. You don't have any example.
Actually, you've only got about 30 seconds left.
Okay.
If you want to complete your... No, I'm going to let Mr. Adler conclude his remark. Were you finished your comment?
Well, thank you, Chair. Let me say that the member of Parliament or the senator can ask the head of the agency to conduct an investigation. If the head of that agency deems it's worthwhile, it says in the proposed bill, it says may conduct an investigation. If there seems that on the, I guess, a prima facie case that there is evidence of a political agenda or partisan activity, then that head of that agency can conduct an investigation and make those findings available to both the Speaker of the House and the Speaker of the Senate, all very public.
And you'd be able to do that as a smear? You could just put that out as a press release saying that you think Elections Canada is unfairly targeting Mr. Panashaway, Mr. Dean Del Mastro?
I'm afraid you're out of time, Mr. Angus. There's no time for a response, I don't believe, to that. And the next questioner is Mr. Calandra. 7 minutes, please, Mr. Calandra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Adler. Congratulations on being able to bring a private member's bill forward. I think it's pretty obvious, and I imagine you must have known when you were drafting the bill that this would be a bill that was that would bring some controversy or contention with it. I think it's quite obvious from the first round of questioning that the avenue that at least the opposition is going to go on here, but I'm more concerned with what your motivations are on this, and in particular, I think it was quite clear from the moment the bill was introduced that many people are categorizing this as a bit of a witch hunt, and I'm wondering if you can address that, what your motivation was when you were bringing the bill forward, and just address the witch hunt aspect of this bill.
Well, thank you for that question, Mr. Calandra. And I mean, quite frankly, you know, this bill will benefit all members of Parliament, and it's really to enhance transparency and accountability. I mean, once again, these offices, these 9 agents of Parliament, hold a very unique position within our parliamentary democracy. And what is required? These people sit in judgment on members of Parliament. And currently, the people who are employed in these agencies must sign an oath. Nothing like that on that front changes. The only change that we're asking for here in my private member's bill is that any past partisan activity dating back 10 years be made public. For the life of me, I can't understand why anybody would be against transparency. And so I think that transparency is a good thing. I know certainly my constituents tell me so when I go door to door in my own riding of York Centre. The more transparency and accountability, the better. And this is consistent with what our government has been doing since 2006, since we came into power, initially with the Federal Accountability Act. And on that score, we've introduced a number of other pieces of legislation to improve transparency. This is just another leg in the stool. So I think this transparency is a good thing. I think this bill is a good thing. The more information that's available to the public, to the people of Canada, the better.
So it's safe to say that your goal of the legislation isn't to investigate partisans within current partisans within particular agents. It's not outing anybody for being a particular partisan. The goal is to obviously moving forward help ensure that these agencies continue to work in a fashion that at least I believe they are right now, and is a non-partisan fashion, and this just adds to that level of accountability. I ask that, and I'll give you a moment to address that. I ask that only because I think Mr. Angus is a little bit wasn't quite understanding the purpose of the bill. He seems to be looking for a retroactivity of this, trying to get you to out people who might be partisan. That's not what this is about. No. I'm assuming this is about moving forward and adding another layer of accountability. Am I correct on that?
Exactly. Exactly.
And again, just give me a bit more on the motivation. I mean, obviously, it's a great honor to be able to bring a private member's bill forward. I never had the opportunity when I was first elected. I was, I think, a 212th on the list or something like that. So just give me a little bit of the rationale, your motivation for wanting, for using your spot to bring this forward.
Yeah. Well, you know, given our focus on transparency and accountability as a government, and in the riding, like I said, people have been telling me that the more transparency, the better. With that in mind, when my position came up in anticipation of my position coming up for a private member's bill, I wanted to do something that would enhance the transparency of government in one fashion or another. And in my readings, I came across that these 9 specific agencies of Parliament, all of whom must take an oath to be nonpartisan. I thought it would be just another higher level of transparency and better for the Canadian people to have more enhanced information, more enhanced exposure, and thereby and allow members of Parliament also to have that added level of confidence that when they are being investigated by people who are nonpartisan. It's very, very important. And so, given the import that I placed on this, I thought this would make a good private member's bill, and therefore began to pursue it.
Yeah, so just so if I'm getting, this is in essence what you're trying to do is add another tool to the toolkit for these agents to ensure that they provide that level of accountability, nonpartisan accountability, in essence, so that when a member of Parliament or a senator has a complaint, they can be assured that it is being dealt with in as much of a nonpartisan fashion as we would expect. And this is just another tool in the toolbox for the agents of Parliament.
Absolutely, and that's actually a very good way of putting it. You know, this bill is not just for the governing party. This bill will enhance the powers of all members of Parliament, regardless of party. This has no partisan intent whatsoever. So, yes, if a partisan initiative is suspected by a member of Parliament, once again, it can be referred to the head of that agency, and that head of the agency may conduct an investigation if they deem that partisan activity was part of conducted or guided the investigation in any substantive way. So this is it's about transparency, plain and simple.
Thank you, Mr. Calandra. That concludes your 7 minutes. Next, for the Liberal Party, Mr. Scott Andrews. 7 minutes, Mr. Andrews.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Full disclosure, transparency, they're all good things, and I think we all aspire to do more of it. I'd like to ask you a question about what you call past partisanship, and how past partisanship in one person's life is, in your view, or is considered a bad thing. And why is one's past partisanship an important part of this bill? Because you want to, I think you said, free of political influence. So someone's past partisanship, does that entitles them to some sort of political influence?
No, not at all. And first of all, I've never said that past partisan activity is a bad thing. People have different journeys in their lives, and it takes them down different roads. The mere fact that the expectation from people who work in these offices is that they are nonpartisan. That's the expectation. In fact, they even have to swear an oath to that effect. What this does is it sheds light on the fact that the oath that they take, it's pretty much codifying what they're saying. So past partisan position is clearly enumerated and defined within the bill, and it includes being an electoral candidate, an electoral district association officer, member of a ministerial staff, member of a parliamentary staff, or member of a political staff. I mean, let's face it, Mr. Andrews, that you wouldn't accept an employee of mine, say my chief of staff, and try to hire that person away to work in your office, because you would have some suspicions about that, about their past political affiliations. So what this just does is that it sheds light, it opens the curtain, it lets the light in, and allow members of parliament and people to see that people have had past partisan activities, period. It's as simple as that.
So, but you didn't explain why someone's past partisanship is a bad thing. You, sir, were a Liberal staffer at one point of your life. You were a donor to the Liberal Party. And you said more information is better and the public deserves more. Don't think you disclosed any of that when you were running for office yourself.
Well, the mere fact that you know about it, clearly it was disclosed. I mean, it's clear. The whole point of my bill is transparency. You just proved my point that transparency is a good thing.
But I'm
expected. Don't you understand? See, Mr. Andrews, I'm expected.
Order, one at a time. Who wants the floor here?
Well, I'm expected as a politician, as you are, to be partisan. There's nothing wrong with that. Nobody is saying. Never once did I say, contrary to what you said, that partisan activity is a bad thing. I'm not making any judgment here. This is just the mere fact that people who would work in these agencies merely to put on a public website for all to see any past partisan activity. This bill doesn't judge anyone. It just makes it open and transparent.
You didn't put that on your campaign material or on your website when you were running for office.
Mr. Andrews, the fact of the matter is, I'm here to talk about my private member's bill.
I'm just trying to get my head around past partisanship and involvement with an agent of Parliament and free of political influence. So your past partisanship has now freed you of any political influence? Do your colleagues in your party think that he's free of Liberal influence now?
Mr. Andrews, about my past, I'm happy to discuss that with you outside of committee. But I'm here to talk about Bill 520, my private member's bill. But if you want to talk about my past political affiliations and my experiences, I'm happy to talk to you about that outside of committee.
So, Mr. Adler, as an agent of Parliament yourself, as a member of Parliament, after you get elected, I think we all strive to a position where we try to act nonpartisan. We try to not let our partisans' activity influence us when we're helping our constituents and that kind of thing. We try to. Don't you try to raise yourself above that bar after you're elected?
Mr. Andrews, clearly this bill talks about the 9 agencies, the exceptional agencies that have to do with reporting to Parliament.
Members of Parliament are exceptional too. They are elected by people not from their own parties.
Yeah, but they're not covered by this bill.
But
what I'm here to talk about are the 9 agencies of Parliament.
An agent of Parliament.
One at a time. If you want to pose your question, Mr. Andrews, and then we'll give Mr. Adler time to answer it.
So what's the difference between a member of Parliament being nonpartisan after he's elected and an agent of Parliament after he's appointed being nonpartisan?
The difference is that I'm here to talk about Bill 520 and the 9 enumerated agencies that report to Parliament. Like I said, I'm happy to have the discussion with you offline at any time about my personal life. That's fine. But I'm here to talk about Bill 520.
You want to know about the personal lives of these agents of Parliament, though?
Mr. Andrews, the people in these agencies have a very exceptional role in our parliamentary system. They swear an oath The expectation is that they are nonpartisan.
Isn't that enough? They swore an oath.
What this does, I can't understand why anybody would be against more transparency. I mean, transparency is a good thing.
So
you know,
these agents of Parliament are coming before our committee. Do you think that's a good idea to have them come before our committee to address this as well and get an understanding?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that, please?
I said these agents of Parliament are going to appear before this committee. Do you think they have something to add to the discussion on your bill?
I don't know. You'll have to ask them and wait for them to appear before
No,
the
but
committee.
you think that's a good idea for them to appear?
I don't know what they're going to say, and I'm not going to anticipate what
No,
they're
but
going
I
to say.
said, do you think
I
it's
can
a
only
good thing for
speak-
them to appear before the committee to
Mr.
discuss your
Andrews,
bill?
they will appear, and you will have time, ample time, I'm assuming, to ask them questions.
But is that a good idea for them to come before this committee to discuss your bill?
Listen, I'm here at committee. I'm here in the spirit of fulsome discussion of Bill 520. That's why I'm here.
And do you think they should come to appear before the committee to discuss their past involvement and their lives prior to being elected to Parliament? How they actually got their jobs? Like these individuals are there now. How did they go through the process of being
Quite
hired?
frankly, I don't know what you're talking about because it's not within 520. I don't.
Their names are in 520. I'm just wondering if it's a good idea for them to come discuss your bill.
I don't know. You'll have to ask them that question when they appear.
I'm afraid your 7 minutes is up. Thank you. And for the Conservatives, they're going to split their time. Mr. Calandra first, and then Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you. Sorry, just a quick question. I mean, Mr. Andrews has brought this up with respect to your past. I guess he doesn't look at elections.ca to see when people donate to political parties. He's probably never heard of the website, I guess. He's not, you of course aren't the only person who's been a liberal in his past. There are many people who have been liberals in their past. I too was once a liberal when I was like 14 or 15, and then I grew up and I got educated and became a conservative. I'm wondering, since Mr. Andrews is so concerned about your past, if you could maybe help explain what it was that so turned you off of the Liberals. Was it the fact that they always broke election promises? Was it the fact that they promised to get rid of the GST and lied about that? Was it the fact that they promised to enact Kyoto but then admitted that they actually never had any intention of doing it because it was just really a
Point of
partisan
order, Mr.
activity?
Chair.
Was it...
Point of order from Mr. Ravigny.
You know, with all due respect to my honourable colleague and his questions, I'm here, and I think that most of us are here to hear about 520, C520.
Great.
And I think that this line of questioning is irrelevant and not particularly on subject. So I'd like you to rule on that, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, the point of order is one on relevance, and I'm inclined to agree that you do have a point. And Mr. Calandra, if you could limit your questioning something related at least to Bill C-520.
Yeah. So I can actually finish the question then, Mr. Chair? Is that okay with you?
As long as it has, if you can bring it around to C-520.
So,
take
of
the
all
time
of
you want.
those things, since it was actually brought up by Mr. Andrews in his questioning, and apparently now they're not interested in hearing the answer to the questions that they brought up, I'm wondering if you could also then share with the committee, because it seems to be a point of contention, what it was that turned you off of the Liberals and made you want to come forward and serve as a Conservative member of Parliament.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Consistent on relevance. Really, I don't know if that has
Mr.
any
Chair,
bearing
it
on
was,
Bill C-520.
Sorry, on a point, it was brought up actually by Mr. Andrews. And I
Yeah,
didn't-
but nobody called a point of order on relevance with Mr. Andrews. He can use his 7 minutes as he sees fit. You've been called into line by a legitimate point of order. I don't see the relevance, and
sorry,
therefore,
I challenge
if
the
you have
ruling
any
of the
other
chair.
questions,
I'd like to hear the question answered.
the chair has been challenged. So, all those in favor of the ruling of the chair, please signify in the usual manner. Hands down, opposed if any. The ruling of the chair has been overturned. Yeah. So, yeah, it's your 7 minutes. Answer the question if you like.
Thank you. Well, I mean, Mr. Calandra, as you know, there are many of us who, I speak to a lot of people who are...
The witness asked if me and him could have a conversation offline about my subject. Maybe he could have the same conversation offline with his Conservative colleague.
Yeah. You don't have a point of order. Yeah, carry on, Mr. Adler.
Thank you. My understanding is that there are many people who at one time were Liberals and who are now Conservatives because, yes, of the chain of broken promises that they, first of all said, and going back many, many years about wage and price controls, how they'd never bring them in, and then they did, and then, getting rid of axing the tax. Well, the tax was never axed, and just a full chain of broken promises about their votes against Israel at the United Nations, and not standing with our friends in the Middle East, the only democracy. I mean, these are just a range, a series of broken promises, a series of disappointments that not only I felt as a one-time Liberal and felt that the Liberal Party really didn't represent me. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of people who I speak to, and the proof is in the pudding, right? I mean, the Liberal Party was one time considered to be Canada's governing party and is now a mere rump in the House of Commons. So it's clear that, I'm not the only one who feels this way. And, I would ask that if Mr. Angus has posed a similar question to his leader, who was once a Liberal, or to if Mr. Andrews had posed that question to Mr. Ray, who was once the NDP Premier of Ontario. So, I mean, these are, very similar kind of circumstances, and, those two happen to make the wrong decisions. I feel I made the right decision in becoming a Conservative, and I'm proud of it.
How much time is left, Mr. Chair?
Remaining.
I yield to Mr. Zimmer.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mark, for coming here. I guess I'd use a hockey metaphor. I'm an Oilers fan, I must admit, even though we're not doing that well this year. But I would like to know that my referee in a particular hockey game is neutral and non-affiliated with any particular team. And I see the 10-year allotment that you have, or given a proof of affiliation, I think is a good part of your bill. Can you just explain a bit about that 10-year prior affiliation, what that person has to state, whether they've been affiliated with a particular party? Just explain that part of your bill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Zimmer, for that excellent question. And I chose the 10-year period because it represents 2 election cycles, more or less. That's the reason I chose 10 years. Now, I just want to quote from a letter that I know is in possession of all of the members that 7 heads of the various agents of Parliament had sent along to you, the Chair. In the opening paragraph, it says, as agents of Parliament, we support initiatives that enhance transparency and accountability to Parliament and Canadians. Our role is to serve Parliament in a strictly nonpartisan manner. In this regard, we support the principle that underlies Bill C-520 and are committed to ensuring that we and the employees of our respective offices discharge our duties and functions in a fair, independent, impartial, and nonpartisan manner. The principle of transparency is supported by 7 of the 9 heads of agents of Parliament that had written to you, Mr. Chair. So transparency, from my perspective, and I know from the perspective of our government, and I would hope from the perspective of the opposition parties, would be something that they would be in favor of supporting.
Yeah, and Mark, I just want to talk about that because you talked about that a bit too. I think what's being lost in this conversation, I think, with the opposition is that this affects all parties equally. It isn't picking on a particular party. It's saying, look, these officers and offices have to be nonpartisan regardless of the party. And to me, so to me, it is transparent. It's completely fair. It's equitable. It's everything that I would expect as a parliamentarian of an officer. And getting back to the referee analogy or metaphor, for the big game, the 7th game in the Stanley Cup playoffs, I want to make sure that that particular officer or that particular referee is as neutral as absolutely possible. And I think both sides respect that neutrality. I think we both have a better game as a result of that. So can you just give us some final words on how this is a transparent bill and deals with those concerns?
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for that question too. And yes. Thank you. As Justice Louis Brandeis said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. The more information we have, not only as members of Parliament, but that the public has, is always a good thing. The more we pull back the curtain, the more we let light in, the more that people can see what is behind decisions of members of our government, of our legislative process, of our executive is good for enhances democracy, it enhances accountability, it enhances transparency. And like I said earlier, for the life of me, I can't understand why anybody would be against greater transparency.
That concludes your time, Mr. Zimmer. Thank you, Mr. Adler. Next for the NDP, Mr. Matthew Ravignac.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Adler, for being here to defend your bill and for taking a hit for the PMO's office. It's a pleasure to have you here. It's clear that this bill has some serious legitimacy issues. I mean, even your honourable colleague, Mr. Calandra, admits that it's a witch hunt. I can give you the record for that witch hunt. Linda Keane, regulator for Atomic Energy Canada, fired and immediately called a Liberal appointee, Richard Colvin, Afghan detainees, subpoenaed to testify before committee. The minister at the time questioned his integrity, his professionalism. There were suggestions he was a partisan. Kevin Page, maligned. Suggestions he was a partisan. Marc Mirin wears a jersey, repeated just a couple of minutes ago by Mr. Zimmer. A partisan jersey. They've accused Elections Canada of partisan actions in the past, such as raiding Conservative headquarters.
Yeah, that is not what I said. You can check the record. That you're completely misstating what we said, and I think you misstated with Mr. Calandra and myself. So please state the facts. At least quote me accurately. Thank you.
On the same point of order, Mr. Angus.
Yes, I think it's the issue here is that my colleague was using the same reference that Mr. Poilievre used when he attacked Mr. Mayran. So my colleague was repeating the smear by just saying that they should be wearing they shouldn't be wearing partisan jerseys.
No, he said that
so he was repeating the smear.
He said that I said a particular
you don't have the floor.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, if I could
On the
finish
same
my
point
question.
of order, Mr. Calandra.
In the interest of clarification, he might want to then double check, because the minister did not make that comment about Mr. Mayran. The minister made that comment specifically with respect to the Elections Commissioner's job going forward, and that the Election Commissioner, who will be investigating members of Parliament in the new Fair Elections Act, should not be somebody with a partisan jury. He never said that about Mr. Mayran. So in the interest of clarity, I'm sure he'd want to retract pretty much everything that he said in his
Mr.
opening
Chair,
statement.
sometimes...
But he won't, because that's not what he does.
We have a point of order on the floor. Point of order as precedence. I'm going to rule that it's not a point of order. We have no way of checking the veracity of what was said by Mr. Poilievre, and Mr. Matthew Ravignac can attribute whatever sayings he wants. We can leave it up to any listeners or observers to determine how factual it was. Mr. Ravignac, you have 4 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I can see that sometimes wounds hurt when you touch them while they're healing. Anyways, I'd like to ask you a very pointed question. It's very simple. Isn't it true that the PMO's office essentially gave you this bill to distract from the Conservatives' poor record on transparency and accountability?
Well, thank you for that question. You know, this is a private member's bill, and the whole purpose of a private member's bill is it's brought in by somebody who's not a member of the government, just as a member of Parliament, which is in fact what I have done. I hope to muster the support of as many members of Parliament as possible, and in the outcome of passing this very important piece of proposed legislation, which I think would be
okay, well, thank you for that answer. I think that pretty much answers what... The problems with this bill go on and on. I mean, and we're not the only ones to be pointing it out. It's been pointed out by various commissioners. Has no definition of partisan conduct, no threshold of evidence that would be required to request an investigation, no remedial action or any redress mechanism for the employee, no confidentiality requirements for examinations, nothing on the impacts of an examination on an employee, and nothing if there is no basis for finding that employee acted in a partisan manner. A lack of definitions is problematic. I can quote, for example, the letter to our honourable chair to that effect by the commissioners. When a letter is signed by no less than, I think it's 5 commissioners, and these are experts, there are clear holes in this bill. This is not a serious attempt to deal with partisan issues at the highest levels. There's never been a single case where it's been a problem. All of this is smoke and mirrors. Could you just simply admit it, Mr. Adler? This has nothing to do with true dealings with cases of partisanship, and it's a flawed bill. Why bring it forward? The Public Service Elections Act of Canada has provisions in it for partisanship. It's actually better at defining what partisanship is about than your bill. Recognize it. Do you recognize that these are fundamental problems, Mr. Adler?
Well, I don't know if I'll be able to persuade you of anything other than your own conclusions.
I'm not the only
Mr.
one
Avenue,
saying it,
but
Mr. Adler.
Let me. It's quite clear what the definition of a partisan position is in the bill, and I suspect that, given that you don't know what the definition is, that you didn't read the bill, and the politically partisan position means the following. If you are an electoral candidate, if you serve on an electoral district association as an officer, if you're a member of a ministerial staff, if you're a member of a parliamentary staff,
Mr. Adler, I'll just interrupt you. I don't need you to read. I read the bill, and there are serious flaws in the bill. You're not responding to those serious issues. I'd also like to say this. The Public Service Commissioner, Integrity Commissioner, stated in a letter to Mr. Martin that the PSCA is concerned, or rather that we are concerned about the lack of any sort of merit-based examination, and the PSCA does deal with public servants already. Now, this is quite serious. We have commissioners here who have taken the time to speak to the flaws in this bill. These are flaws that exist in your bill. I would like to know, what would you respond to the Public Service Commission's?
Well, I would say that these 9 agencies of Parliament are not just public servants. They hold a very exceptional role, and the expectation is that they are to be nonpartisan.
Have you looked at how your bill overlaps?
Adler, I don't think you'll have time to expand on that. Perhaps in response to other questions you can elaborate. Pat Davidson for the Conservatives. 5 minutes. We're in 5-minute rounds, colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And welcome, Mr. Adler. Congratulations on getting your private member's bill this far to committee. And I know that we all have a lot of questions. And one of the questions that and comments that I have heard several times is the fact that some people do not believe that there is any definition of partisan activities. I know you talked about that in your opening remarks, and I know you also just tried to address that issue with my colleague across the table, but we're unable to. So I would like to give you this opportunity to talk about the definition of partisan activities, please, as it refers to your bill.
Yes. Well, the partisan activity is clearly defined within the bill. And there are a number of definitions that, a number of phrases and terms that are defined within the Bill 520. But specifically in terms of what a partisan position is, it clearly states under subsection C, section 2, that a politically partisan position means any of the following positions. Electoral candidate, 1. 2. Electoral district association officer. 3. Member of a ministerial staff. 4. Member of a parliamentary staff. Or 5. Member of a political staff.
Okay, thank you very much. Why should former partisans need to disclose their past activities?
Well, I think in the greater spirit of transparency, these are very unique agencies that we are talking about here. These are not just public servants. These people have oversight over the elected members of Parliament. They hold a very unique position. In fact, the chief electoral officer isn't even allowed to vote. That's how unique these positions are. It's important that the public and members of parliament have the level of confidence that people who stand in judgment upon them are non-partisan. They take the oath, according to the Public Service Employment Act, that they must be non-partisan. This is consistent with their oath. This is about more information being available to both members of parliament, the people who are elected, and the people that send them there, the voters, the constituents. More information is better. More transparency is better. More accountability is better. It's in the interests of everyone.
Okay, so we've talked about partisan activities and why we need to disclose this. Does your bill ban political activity?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Could you explain that? Elaborate on that a bit, please?
There is no provision in the bill whatsoever that bans political activity. Now, currently, under the current legislation, the Public Service Employment Act, those people who work in these agencies must take an oath to the effect that they are non-partisan. What my bill simply does is that it opens the curtain. It makes it for all to see. It's not just, currently right now, if someone is suspected of partisan activity, an investigation is conducted in secret. What this does is that it brings it out into the open. More information is better. It's better that we know more about those people that stand in judgment upon members of parliament. It benefits both the members of parliament and definitely the voters, people of Canada. It's essential that the people have as much information as possible, particularly about those people who stand in judgment upon members of parliament. Definitions are clearly defined within the proposed bill. And I would think that all members of parliament would be in favor of more transparency, of allowing people, citizens of Canada, the voters that send the members of parliament, that elect their members of parliament to parliament, that they would have more information at their disposal. I think it's a good thing.
Okay. When you were doing your research, were you able to find any other countries that might have a comparable legislation in place?
Yeah, in fact, Australia has very similar legislation, the United States, Britain. We're heading towards a world now where more transparency. And I can't understand why anybody would be against more transparency. I think it's a good thing, and I know most members of parliament do too.
To conclude this 5-minute round,
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. For the NDP is Charmaine Borg. 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Adler, for coming today to speak to your bill. I'd like to start by coming back to a question my colleague, Mr. Ravigna, put to you about the lack of definitions. You said that there are definitions in your bill. You defined a member of political staff, or political staff rather. In Section 9 of your bill, it says that there can be allegations about conducting responsibilities in a partisan manner, but there isn't a definition of that. So let's say the Chief Electoral Officer decides to investigate a certain candidate of a political party, and they decide that that's partisan behavior because they're targeting one political party specifically. I think that's a very serious concern. And I think that you should address that concern. You should actually define in your bill partisan manner, because we can't just conduct a witch hunt of all people who have responsibilities. Let's take, for example, even whistleblowers. So, Mr. Adler, there has to be a definition of partisan manner. Can you tell us if you will do that? And could you please be specific about that partisan manner?
Suspects that there was a partisan motivation behind a investigation or some kind of query. the Member of Parliament can request as you were so right.
Est-ce qu'il y a un système de standards?
But I'd like to know what the standards or the grounds can be. I mean, can anyone just say, well, that was a partisan manner, the way in which someone conducted an investigation? Because I think that's a question the average citizen would want an answer to.
Which I was getting to. You know, it's up to the head of the agency whether or not they deem it's clear in the bill that the head of the agency may conduct an investigation. So the head of the agency would determine whether or not an investigation is worthy based on the evidence provided by the Member of Parliament. So it's quite clear that given the definition of what partisan activity is in the bill, and given the power of the head of the agency to conduct an investigation based on the evidence before him or her, that that investigation could or could not be conducted.
Merci, M. Adler. Je suis pas d'avis que c'est trop.
I do not agree that this is perfectly clear, but I'm going to move on to my next question because I don't have much time. I absolutely agree with transparency. I am all for transparency and impartiality of those who occupy very important positions. But when I look at this bill and when I look at the record of this Conservative government and previous Liberal governments, I see that there have often been partisan appointments. Let's just take a recent case, Chuck Strahl, Chuck Strahl was himself appointed to a very sensitive, a powerful position. But he isn't subject to the same sort of legislation that you're proposing here. It looks like we have a double standard. Chuck Strahl, working for Enbridge, who was appointed himself to a position, he doesn't have to be impartial. He's not subject to the same process that you're suggesting for agents of Parliament. And yet, under the PSCA, these people should be impartial.
Clarification. I don't know about the specifics about those other incidents that you mentioned, but I am here to talk about Bill 520. And Bill 520 clearly enumerates who would fall under the purview of this bill. And it's the 9 agencies of Parliament that stand in judgment of members of Parliament and senators. So these agents are held to a higher standard because they stand in judgment. In fact, the chief electoral officer can't vote. That's how high the standard is. So,
Merci, M. Adler. Je crois que vous vous répétez pas mal. J'ai déjà entendu.
Mr. Adler, I've already heard this answer before. You're being a bit repetitive. So I have another question about the Public Service Employment Act. I don't know if you've ever read that legislation, if you read it when you were drafting your bill, because there are parts in your bill that are problematic. You're suggesting other mechanisms and processes. Now, under Part 7 isn't consistent with Section 6 of your bill. For example, volunteer work. So I have to wrap up quickly, but what I would like to know essentially is, have you looked at the Public Service Employment Act to at least to make sure that it's consistent with what you're proposing?
We're going to move on.
yes, I have read it.
Thank you. I think we're almost concluded. If I could ask one point of clarification, Mr. Adler.
Yes.
You said that what you do have clearly defined in the bill is partisan positions you refer to. You don't have a clear definition of what partisan activities or partisan conduct might be. We can understand partisan positions if you were a staff rep, if you ran for office, etc. But what are other partisan activities or partisan conduct? What are you getting at there?
Well, what is covered by this bill is clearly partisan positions, and as they are defined within the bill.
But you also make reference to activity and conduct elsewhere in the bill.
Coming out of holding those partisan positions. So, for example, if you're an electoral candidate, it follows that you are running for office. If you are president of a riding association, that's clearly a partisan activity. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, it's really up to the head of the agency to decide whether or not, on reference from a member of Parliament, whether or not that activity is considered to be partisan or not.
Okay. Sadly, Sadly, we don't have any more time to examine this bill at this stage, but thank you for coming before the committee. Mr. Adler, we appreciate it. We're going to suspend briefly and invite our next round of witnesses. The meeting is suspended. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll clear the room of media, please, and reconvene the meeting. Mr. Angus.
Yeah, just at the outset, I'd like to welcome our guests, the Auditor General, Elections Canada, and Ms. Dawson. I think this is a very good beginning to this set of hearings because these people have the trust of the Canadian voters, and I want to thank them and welcome them to our committee.
Mr. Chairman, that's not really necessary, Mr. Angus. As the chair, I was going to welcome our witnesses to the committee, but thank you for your enthusiasm. No, we do appreciate three of the officers of Parliament who made themselves available on very short notice to come and discuss Bill C-520. We, as committee members, have received a written correspondence signed by 7 agents of Parliament, and we appreciated that input as well. We have 1 thin hour to deal with this situation, and unfortunately, so we'll welcome your opening remarks as you see fit to use them, up to a maximum perhaps of 10 minutes each, or a combined effort as you see fit. Mr. Mayran, Madame Dawson, and Mr. Ferguson, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for this opportunity to present my perspectives on Bill C-520. At the outset, I would like to assure you that my employees and I are committed to carrying out our duties in a fair, independent, impartial, and non-partisan manner. I recently signed a letter along with several other agents of Parliament that emphasized this point. Cette lettre contient plusieurs.
The letter also makes several observations of a technical nature regarding the interaction of the provisions of this bill with the current regime that governs political activities of public servants. The letter provides a description of aspects of the bill on which we would appreciate some clarification. Section 6 of the bill requires an agent of Parliament who intends to occupy a politically partisan position while still holding his or her position as an agent of Parliament to make a written declaration of intent as soon as possible before occupying the political position. Currently, under Section 117 of the Public Service Employment Act, I am not permitted to engage in any political activity other than voting in an election. The situation described in Section 6 could never occur, and I would not like people to get the impression by reading the bill that it could.
Produce unintended consequences. Under the current legislation, I appoint employees to my office in accordance with the Public Service Employment Act, the PSEA. Employees are hired based on the merit principle. Subsection 7.1 of the bill requires an applicant for employment to provide, as soon as possible in the hiring process, a declaration as to whether or not they have occupied a politically partisan position in the past 10 years. Consideration of prior politically partisan positions would not be permitted to influence the current selection process. Under the PSEA, if an individual had declared prior politically partisan positions and for reasons of merit was unsuccessful in obtaining a position, that individual could challenge the decision not to hire on the basis that his or her declaration influenced the hiring process. Moreover, the publication requirement of this personal information could discourage individuals from seeking employment with our office. Section 9 of the bill states that I may examine allegations made by a member of Parliament or a senator that an employee has carried out their duties and responsibilities in a partisan manner. If an examination of such allegations is carried out, a report must be sent for tabling in both houses. The proposed examination power would benefit from clarification as to what constitutes partisan conduct and the threshold of evidence required to request an examination. Under the PSEA, the Public Service Commission investigates allegations of political activity on the part of public servants. Political activity is defined very broadly in that Act, and in my view, it could include partisan conduct. In addition, there is no confidentiality mechanism to protect the reputation of the employee whose conduct was examined and found to be appropriate and nonpartisan. It may be worthwhile to consider whether the investigation provisions of the PSEA are a more effective method for independent oversight. Given the apparent overlap with the PSEA, a witness from the Public Service Commission would be of assistance in the committee's deliberations. Je recommande au comité d'étudier plus en détail.
There's a third aspect of this bill which I would recommend to the committee for further study, and that is its impact on the privacy of individual employees. I have mentioned some possible consequences in connection with hiring and investigations. I would now like to touch on other possible impacts. Upon coming into force, the bill requires written declarations from all employees in our office as to whether or not they occupied a politically partisan position within the 10 years prior to joining the office, and a declaration from those who may have occupied such a position that they have been carrying out their employment duties in a non-partisan manner. The fact that some employees would be required to make a declaration could have adverse consequences. The public disclosure of this past activity also causes the individual's current place of work to be known. Furthermore, over the past 10 years, the employee may have changed political allegiance. Factors such as these may give an employee incentive to withhold information about past political activity rather than to disclose it. For these reasons, employees may be reluctant to make a declaration.
All employees, no matter what duties they carry out. The committee may wish to consider whether the objectives of the bill could still be met by restricting its application to those senior managers and employees with authority, influence, and supervision over the work of the office. In closing, I'd like to say a few words about the processes and declarations that are currently required of the employees in our office to ensure that they comply with professional audit standards, our Code of Values and Ethics, and current legislation. Chaque année, tous les employés.
Each year, every employee completes a conflict of interest declaration, acknowledging, among other things, the obligation to act in a non-partisan, independent, and impartial manner. At the start of every audit, every individual who participates on the audit must complete a comprehensive declaration of their independence. Any cases that give rise to a real or perceived threat to independence are reviewed by senior managers and our office's specialist for values and ethics. Mr. Chairman, I hope that these comments will be of assistance to the committee as it undertakes its review of Bill C-520. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Next, I believe we'll hear from the Chief Electoral Officer, Mr. Mark Mayrand.
Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie de m'avoir invité à m'adresser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me to address the committee today. Let me start by saying that I am in agreement with the remarks that have just been made by my colleague, the Auditor General. He has identified several important aspects of Bill C-520, which I also believe are worthy of careful review by this committee. As an agent of Parliament, I can assure you that I, too, am deeply committed to the principle and the practice of political neutrality. This principle is fundamental to the administration of the Canada Elections Act and is absolutely central to the performance of my mandate. Each agent of Parliament is unique. In my case, given my role administering electoral events and regulating the activities of political participants, the need for political neutrality is particularly acute. Indeed, the Elections Canada Code of Conduct imposes on employees an obligation to observe strict political neutrality at the federal, provincial, and territorial levels, not only in the exercise of their functions and duties, but also in their activities outside work. Letters of offer to employees detail these conditions of employment regarding political neutrality. These stringent requirements reflect my conviction that everyone working at Elections Canada, no matter their position, must remain and be seen to remain neutral at all times. The objective of maintaining neutrality in the organization would not be achieved by allowing even a small number of employees to engage in political activity, no matter how limited, at the federal, provincial, or territorial level. I believe it is consistent with what Canadians would expect of the people who work for the country's national electoral body. We can take no risks in threatening the confidence of electors and political stakeholders in the administration of the electoral process. Similar conditions have been placed on employees at Elections Canada since long before I became Chief Electoral Officer, and to my knowledge, there have never been any concerns expressed inside the organization about this. In light of our Code of Conduct, the restrictions on political activity imposed by Bill C-520 would not have much effect on Elections Canada employees, with one significant exception. The obligation in Clause 11 of the bill to publish on our website the past politically partisan positions of staff over the last 10 years would be new. I see this unnecessary requirement as a serious infringement of the privacy of employees and incompatible with the principle of merit when hiring staff.
C-520, whether it is intended to apply to contractors with agents of Parliament as well as employees. The bill refers to a person who works or occupies a position in the office of an agent of Parliament. In any event, in case where Elections Canada directly procures services and where delivery of those services might raise a reasonable concern regarding political impartiality, contractors are subject to an obligation to avoid political activities for the term of the contract. In fact, suppliers who cannot certify their ability to adhere to this obligation will not be issued a contract. Finally, you should be aware that key election officers are also severely limited in their ability to engage in political activity. The Canada Elections Act itself makes it an offense for a returning officer to engage in political partisan conduct. Of course, this is not surprising. In addition, Clause 5 of the Code of Professional Conduct for Election Administrator restricts returning officers from engaging in political activity at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels. This is different from employees and contractors who are not restricted from political activity at the municipal level. But in light of the work being conducted by returning officers locally, I felt it was important to add this additional restriction for them. As a last point, I would also like to comment on Clause 9 of the bill, which would allow members of the Senate and House of Commons to make a complaint regarding political behavior on the part of my staff. The Auditor General already touched on this provision in his remarks. It should be noted that even without this bill, anyone who wishes to make a complaint about political activity on the part of those who work for an agent of Parliament can do so. There are mechanisms in place to deal with such complaints. For my part, I would like to underline my accountability for the conduct of those in the organization I run. Should there be any concern regarding the conduct of my staff, it is my role to appear before Parliament to account. That concludes my introductory remarks, Mr. Chair. I have also provided the clerk copies of the Election Canada Code of Conduct as well as the Code of Professional Conduct for Election Administrators. I would be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayran. Yes, the Code of Conduct has been circulated to committee members. Next, we welcome the Ethics Commissioner of Canada, Ms. Mary Dawson.
Monsieur le Président, merci de m'avoir invité.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting me to appear before you today. I am pleased to contribute to the committee's study of Bill C-520. During my opening remarks, I will share some general observations with reference to relevant practices in my own office. I will also comment briefly on several specific elements of the proposed legislation.
C-520. My office is part of Parliament itself. As an officer of Parliament, my office is a separate employer that is not subject to the Public Service Employment Act. It is for this reason that I'm not a signatory of the letter that I believe has been submitted to the committee by the others. However, I do agree in large measure with the views they have expressed. Although Bill C-520 does not appear to have been introduced in response to a problem that requires fixing, there is certainly no argument to be made against greater transparency. In fact, I am a strong believer in transparency, as I have noted on many occasions, including in previous appearances before this committee. I'm satisfied that given the checks and balances already in place, my office could withstand any scrutiny contemplated by Bill C-520. However, I do note that there could be some technical challenges that might arise from the way the bill is currently structured, and I will briefly refer to some of them later. I acknowledge the importance of nonpartisanship. I believe that nonpartisanship is essential to the ability of all agents and officers of Parliament to fulfill their mandates. They and their staff must perform their duties in a fair and politically impartial manner and be perceived to do so. I note that nonpartisanship is likely already being taken into account in the appointment process for agents and officers of Parliament. The Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, for example, is appointed under the Parliament of Canada Act. That Act requires that the Governor and Council consult with the leader of every recognized party in the House of Commons, and the appointment must be approved by resolution of the House of Commons. Indeed, the principle of nonpartisanship is one that underlies my approach to my role. As is the case with the others covered by Bill C-520, I've implemented a code of values and standards of conduct in my office, again copies of which I have tabled with the committee. This document specifically and extensively addresses political activity and impartiality. It notes the importance of employees maintaining their independence from political interference and discharging their responsibilities in an impartial way. It also recognizes the effect that employees' actions and comments outside the office could have on the reputation of the office as it relates to impartiality and independence. In addition to prescribing desired behaviors and actions, the Code of Values and Standards of Conduct for my office specifically prohibits certain actions. Employees may not participate in any political activities. They are not allowed to share publicly any political allegiance during election campaigns, for example, by posting lawn signs. And they must refrain from making any written or verbal comments, including in the media or on social networks, that favor or could be perceived as favoring one political party over another. During the more than 6 years that I have been Commissioner, there has never been a case where the work of an employee in my office has been influenced or has appeared to have been influenced by political opinions or beliefs. If such a case were to arise, it would contravene our standards of conduct, and the employee would be subject to disciplinary measures up to termination of employment. A few of my employees have previously worked in political offices of various party affiliations. As professionals, however, they perform their official duties and responsibilities in a strictly nonpartisan manner. I also note that their knowledge and experience of the workings of Parliament have been very helpful in fulfilling their duties at the office. It would be an unfortunate consequence of any initiative if it became an impediment to qualified people taking on positions in the office of an officer or agent of Parliament. As I mentioned earlier, I believe there are changes to the bill that should be considered. For example, it does not establish a clear threshold for launching an examination, such as requiring the person making the request to set out the reasonable grounds for the belief that the staff member conducted his or her duties and responsibilities in a partisan manner. Nor does it provide a process by which an employee has the right to respond to the allegation being made. As well, the bill does not define what constitutes partisan behavior. It does not set out provisions for conducting an examination in private. I note that both the Conflict of Interest Act and the Conflict of Interest Code for members of the House of Commons contain such provisions, ensuring the application of principles of procedural fairness and natural justice. Finally, the bill is very broad and applies equally to all employees, regardless of level or whether they are in a position to make or influence decisions. In short, while I have no issue with the principle of transparency that underpins the bill, I'm not convinced that the bill is necessary. I believe that the current draft could be improved, and I hope, if this bill is enacted, that the final version clarifies these matters. Je remercie à nouveau le comité de m'avoir donné.
Again, I thank the committee for this opportunity to discuss Bill C-520. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to answering your questions.
We'll go right to questioning then. The first round for the NDP, Mr. Charlie Angus. 7 minutes, Mr. Angus.
Thank you. It's a real honor to have the three of you here today. For those who are watching back home, to understand what we're talking about, your responsibility, collective responsibility, is to ensure accountability from the elected members of Parliament and from the bureaucracy in this country, and to ensure, Mr. Mayrand, in your case, that the electoral process is conducted in a fair manner. Mr. Adler told us that it was, quote, imperative. He used that word a number of times, imperative to bring this bill. We asked him if he could find any examples of any abuse, partisan abuse. He was unable to answer that. Are any of you aware of any allegations that would warrant this bill against any of your staff or any of the agents of Parliament? Has there been this issue raised prior to this bill coming? Anyone in particular? Yeah.
Certainly no, there have been no allegations in the case of the Office of the Auditor General.
Okay, it's right across the board. Mr. Ferguson, as the Auditor General, you have a very specific and important role in terms of ensuring accountability to Canadians. And you take an oath as part of this work?
Yes.
Right now you're investigating the Senate. I understand there's a Senate audit on, and according to a February 13th article, there were some senators who were not wanting to seem to comply. I don't want to get into the details of that audit, but whether it was the sponsorship scandal with your predecessors, whether it's the misspending of the F-35, you have a very, sometimes politically hot role to play because you expose the powerful. My question is, under this bill, under Section 9 and 10, it would be extraordinary because now the people who are being investigated would be able to demand investigations of you and your staff. Is that your reading of Section 9 and Section 10 of this bill?
Certainly under Section 9 and Section 10, you know, gives the right for somebody to bring to my attention any accusation of these types of activity. It's, you know, again, the term partisan manner is not defined, so that's something that as an agent, you know, we would have to determine, and I think my colleagues have also made the comments that, you know, there's no definition of what would be reasonable ground and that sort of thing. And, you know, again, there are ways for people already to come forward and you know, bring forward any concerns that they might have if they feel any of our people are acting in any way not objectively. Because as my colleague said, we very much have processes in place as well to make sure that that's how we operate.
So this bill has no threshold for what would launch an attack, no investigation, no definition of what the partisan activities would be. I just want to ask you, Mr. Ferguson, in light of the roles of the Auditor Generals in the provinces and other jurisdictions, are you aware of any other jurisdiction where those who may be under investigation would be able to publicly go and denounce the work of an Auditor General who's investigating them?
Well, I think people can always raise questions about any aspect of you know, the work that we do. But I think, again, our processes and the way that we have done the work for more than 100 years have stood the test of time.
Yes. So this bill, what it adds is the ability of a Conservative member or senator to launch to demand an investigation with no threshold. Mr. Mayrand, just to put it on the record, just this past month, your staff insisted that one of my volunteers from the 2008 election sign a compliance agreement on having left a bank account empty but open. Were you acting in a partisan manner when you decided to look at my campaign of 2008 and 2011?
Ni les employés ni moi-même. In place, we have a piece of legislation that prescribes in much detail, and that's our guidance in administering the legislation.
So the rules are the rules. Politicians get their backs up pretty easy. They don't like getting questioned. But the rules are the rules. So you're there to enforce the rules. So whether it's me or whether it's Dean Del Mastro, your job is to enforce the rules. You do not wear a team jersey?
Absolument pas.
Oh, absolutely not.
My colleague, Mr. Zimmer, he's repeating what I thought was sounded very much to me like a smear from Mr. Polyev, that they were having to rewrite the Elections Act to ensure that Elections Canada isn't wearing a team jersey when they launch investigations. Are you aware of any allegations that Elections Canada has been wearing a, quote, team jersey, that we need to not only rewrite the electoral laws, but now we need to allow people like Mr. Zimmer to demand investigations of you?
Point of order. Yeah, I just would...
Mr. Zimmer, you have a point of order?
Yeah, to just challenge Mr. Angus to state the facts when he's quoting something that I've said is stick to the facts, Mr. Angus, please.
Well, that's not a point of order. That's
Well, I'll decide whether it's a point of order or not.
Yes, Sheriff.
And it's not a point of order. Carry on, Mr. Angus.
Mr. Mayran, when you... The allegation that's being laid out there is that your office is wearing a team jersey. We have to rewrite the entire Elections Act. We're having to rewrite so colleagues, whether it's Mr. Zimmer or Ms. Tilly-O'Gordon, can demand investigations. Do Elections Canada wear team jerseys when they enforce the electoral rules of this country?
À mon avis, non. Et
In my opinion, no.
opening remarks, anyone in this country may file a complaint with the office regarding the activities and the way that the activities are carried, whether they feel that they are tainted by political activities. They can always file a complaint, and such complaint will be duly examined, investigated, and plaintiff will be informed of the outcome.
Okay. Mr. Dean Del Mastro, who's now under investigations from Elections Canada, stood up in the House. He accused your office of making a breach of privilege against him for investigating whether or not he broke the laws of Canada. He said that he, quote, feels violated and betrayed by an agency in which I and every member of this place put their trust, that this was conducted with malice and contempt for Mr. Del Mastro and his family. When you investigated whether Mr. Del Mastro was breaking the laws of Canada, was there any team jersey, or were you just simply following the law?
Please, Mr. Mayran.
Again, I won't comment on any matter that's before the courts. As you know, there are proceedings now pending before the courts.
That concludes your time, Mr. Angus. You're finished. Next, for the Conservatives, Mr. Paul Calandra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess to each of you individually, Mr. Angus has indicated in his comments that this bill would allow Conservatives to launch a complaint against each of you. In your read of the bill, can you point to the section that allows only Conservatives to launch a complaint against the work that you're doing? Because I've missed it, so if that's in there, if you guys could point that out to me. Any one of you, Ms. Dawson, do you see that anywhere in the bill?
No, it's not in the bill.
No. What about you, Mr. Mayran?
My understanding is that any member of the House or the Senate can file a complaint. In fact, any member of Canadian public could do it under other instruments.
Okay, Mr. Ferguson?
I would just agree with Mr. Mayran said.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ferguson, am I allowed to say congratulations on your French? I've been studying for a bit and have had a difficult time. You seem to be doing a lot better than me in a much shorter time period, so congratulations on that, sir. You, in your comments, I just wanted to pick up on something you said. I think it was point 8. It said the bill applies to employees no matter what their duties they carry out. The committee may wish to consider whether the objectives of the bill could still be met by restricting its application to senior managers and employees with authority. I know what you're saying. In essence, perhaps people who are doing administrative work in your office shouldn't be necessarily subject to the entire force of this bill. But bringing it forward to senior managers or people who are in control of particular files, would that be a good idea? Is that something that would that we should seriously consider? Or are you just trying to make what you consider not necessarily a spectacular bill better by looking at ways of improving on it?
Well, I think as I pointed out in my opening comments, there are a number of parts of the bill that I think could be problematic and need to be improved. I think one of the overall concerns is, if this bill was going to go forward, is it really necessary to apply to every single person who comes into our employ? I'm more concerned, though, with something like Section 6, or equally concerned with Section 6, which I think implies that as an agent of Parliament that I could undertake some sort of partisan activity while occupying this position, whereas currently under Section 117 of the Public Sector Employment Act, I cannot do that already. So that just causes some confusion. So overall within the bill, I think there are many of those types of things that would need to be improved for it to achieve its objectives.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mayrand, you, on your presentation, I guess point 4, it says the objective of maintaining neutrality in the organization would not be achieved by allowing even a small number of employees to engage in political activity, no matter how limited, at the federal, provincial, and territorial level. Goes on in point 6, the obligation, clause 11 of the bill, to publish on our website political partisan positions of staff over the last 10 years. That would be obviously a new part. But you, as you said in your opening comments, your organization already seems to have gone into well, not obviously, but has gone in the direction of doing everything that you possibly can to try and remove partisanship entirely from it. So much of the provisions of this act then would have almost no impact on your organization because of what of your positions with respect to partisan activity and in the positions of previous chief electoral officers. Is that fair?
Maybe a first point, however, that I'd like to raise my understanding about the declaration would be about partisan position, not partisan activity. I think it's two things. Partisan position are defined quite narrowly, and you're correct in saying that I wouldn't expect anyone having currently performing any of the positions that are identified in the statute. That would be against our code of ethics. The issue becomes whether when you hire new employees, declaration prior to their employment should be declared. I think that, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that raise issues of privacy.
One of the things that, when I've heard you before the committee before, is one of the frustrations that you've sometimes brought forward is that all members of Parliament, and I think we're all guilty of both Liberal, Conservative, NDP, and Bloc, and I'm not sure if Green, sometimes we approach your office and make allegations against each other, knowing full well that you will likely reject that comment, but there's no, I don't want to say punishment, but there's no recourse to take on the person who made a vexatious request of your office. You seem to be suggesting that, and I don't want to make it sound like you're supportive of all the sections of the bill, but is that something that in this that we should be tightening up, obviously?
Yes, indeed. Actually, my act does allow for me to make comment on frivolous and vexatious, but I've never found that there's always been a kernel of something in these things that are raised. My objection is usually that they're made public and the person that's accused isn't even told about it. But that's another question. With respect to this bill, the problem is deeper than just the frivolous and vexatious. The problem is that there's absolutely no test as to when somebody can make a complaint. At least in my act, you have to have reasonable grounds. And that's why usually there's not a frivolous and vexatious problem, because it just doesn't proceed if there's no reasonable grounds. But under this act, nobody has to even think up any reasonable grounds. They could just fling mud.
Do you have any? Then really briefly, it's also been suggested to me that potentially a cooling off period between partisan activity and employment in your agencies might be something to consider. Any thoughts on that now that I have you?
you know, cooling off periods work, a year or two. It's not something I would necessarily have thought of suggesting, but it's not offensive.
I guess it wouldn't apply to you really, Mr. Mayran, because of your the nature of Elections Canada, but Mr. Ferguson, any?
You know, again, certainly, if the committee decided to add in something around a cooling off period, particularly for the agent, you know, I think that's a reasonable thing to consider.
All right. I don't want to cut you off, Mr. Mayran, but I don't imagine any partisan activity at all is something that you would, contemplate anyway. So, all right, that's fine. Thank you.
Harmonize with the concept of merit that we are all bound to follow when we hire people.
Okay.
So that's an issue that needs to be addressed if you go this route.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayran. Thank you, Mr. Calandra. Next for the Liberal Party, Mr. Scott Andrews.
Thank you, and welcome, folks, and for coming. And it's nice to point out and recognize that each one of the agents of Parliament often come from a long line of distinguished careers within the public service. They've been around government for many years. They've come up through the ranks of deputy ministers, come from outside as well. So I'm kind of just curious, and I'm going to not pick on, but I'm going to ask Mr. Ferguson, because you're the rookie of the group here in the appointments process. And just out of curiosity, could you just shed a little bit of light on to how you were interviewed for the job of Auditor General? What processes that you would have went through? And was a disclosure at any of that time where you asked about your political involvement? I'm just trying to get some light on how one agent of Parliament gets interviewed or gets suggested for their particular role, and was partisanship activity ever discussed or during that type of process that led you to being recommended to Parliament?
Well, the process I went through lasted about a year, so it could take a while for me to describe it all. You know, it included a number of interviews. It included testing, both on language competency and psychometric testing, I guess, on my temperament, essentially, and things like that. So it involved a number of tests and questions and interviews. To the best of my recollection, at no time was there ever any discussion about, you know, any political, and I've not had any political activities, but at no time were there any discussion about that.
Okay. Because it's one thing for the agents of Parliament to have to go through this, and as much as you guys have stated, but your employees as well. We would be into, I guess, the hundreds to thousands of employees that this bill would encompass. Mr. Ferguson, you talked about the overlap with the PSEA, and that. How just does that suffice? Does what the Public Service Commission had there suffice, do you think, for the overlap between what this bill is proposing and what is it strong enough wording and that process?
Well, again, what we're pointing out, I think, is that there are some overlaps, and those overlaps, at least for me, are causing some confusion, and that confusion that's not there in the absence of this bill. So, for example, you know, again, Section 6, you know, under the current legislation, it's quite clear that the only thing that I can do from a political point of view is to vote. That's the only right that I have, whereas under Section 6 it seems to imply that I can consider some partisan activity even while I'm an agent of Parliament. Section 7 talks about you know, a potential employee providing this information as soon as possible. Our concern there is if somebody provides information that says, you know, I've had this type of political partisan position in the past, and that person then is not successful in getting the job that they are applying for, that they might infer that the reason they're not getting that is because of their past political position. So it puts us in, you know, in sort of a problem that's not there right now just based on the merit principle.
And that was my next question, talking about merit and their past involvement. What legal ramifications, because we live in a free country, you're allowed to be involved with a political party, you're allowed to vote. Like, this could really, if someone was to take it to that extent, get into a lot of legal casework on this, do you think?
Well, I'm not going to try and predict sort of that, but certainly the way that some of these sections are written, I think, is adding some confusion that is not there already. That you know would then have to go through some sort of process to try to sort it out.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Maynard. One question. One of the things in Elections Canada legislation is that political parties who finish first and second in each riding in the country have to provide you names of DROs and returning officers, and there's a format, and it's a terrible process because it takes up a lot of our work that we shouldn't be doing anyways. So how does this bill then reflect on the simple on the ground and conflict with some of your Elections Canada?
Again, that's provided by the legislation, and I guess it's reasonable in the context that these workers work in pair. So they are appointed by, there's a check of balance that's built in. I would point out, and something that I will raise in another forum, but C-23 goes much further, the bill that proposed to reform the Election Act. And that would be a concern for me, because from now on, under the new bill, poll supervisors will be appointed by the party who won the riding in the last election. Poll supervisors are overseeing what's happening in the poll, and they are resource person to those workers that work in team. So again, I'm not sure, reading this in the context of this piece of legislation, how again it would fit with one another. On one hand, this bill requires utmost non-partisanship on my part, or the part of all agents of Parliament. On the other hand, another bill builds in an element of partisanship in the system.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how we're going to deal with that in the future.
Absolutely. I didn't realize that on that other bill, and that's something I'd like to get into it at a different forum, because it's a very complex issue from a campaign point of view. Hi, Ms. Dawson. It's a pleasure to have you here again. I just want to go 30 seconds.
Andrews to pose a question.
Okay. Following on Paul Calandra's point of view on investigations and the format for investigations for these things and the partisanship of this place in making recommendations. Do you see this in this bill? Who does the investigations? Are you investigating your own department if a complaint is launched? Do you see that maybe some other agent of Parliament should do the investigation, like to have a bit of separation? Like I'm not quite familiar if that's covered off in this bill.
Well, it's a strange provision 9, because it is a bit odd that it comes into the person running the shop, and you know I find that may in that section a bit strange. Because I can't imagine if you got a complaint like this, people not saying you better look into it. You know, in other words, I don't know how much discretion in practice there actually is, but that's another point. You know, I think it's probably, I don't think it's necessary in the first place, but you know, there could be another person that looks into it.
I'm afraid
it's
I'm
not my bill.
going to have to cut you off, Ms. Dawson. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Ms. Davidson.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to each of you for being here with us this afternoon. Very anxious to hear your input on as we study this bill, and I also want to thank each of you for the role that you play as agents of Parliament. I must admit, Ms. Dawson, I've had more contact with you than the other two gentlemen, but I certainly have always found you to be very impartial and always given us good advice when we have asked for it as a committee. One of the things that we've been hearing a little bit about from the three of you, well, actually from Mr. Mayran and Mr. Ferguson, more than Ms. Dawson, are the differences between the PSEA and this bill. And one of the things that I've been told is that the PSEA does talk a little bit about volunteer activities, but C-520 does not. Can either of you gentlemen comment on that?
In our context, the Code of Ethics would prohibit volunteer activities for political parties or any campaign, whether it's a riding association, a party, or campaign, and that would be prohibited, volunteer work.
Under your code of conduct
Yes.
or under the PSEA?
I think more in the case of the PSEA, it's in the context. It depends on the position you hold in the organization, level of influence, and the visibility. In our case, I would say it's a total prohibition. It's not acceptable for someone at Elections Canada to volunteer, for example, for a party. That's a sacrifice that people that work at Elections Canada must do.
Mr. Ferguson?
I can't speak to all of the aspects of the PSEA, but certainly one question I had when I looked at this bill was the fact that it didn't seem to be covering volunteer activity, so to the extent does that matter or not, I don't know, but I can't speak to exactly how the PSEA would cover that.
Okay, Ms. Dawson, you had indicated that you are not subject to the PSEA, and so therefore you weren't a signatory to the letter, as the other agents of Parliament were subject to that act. And you also talked about some of the technical challenges that might arise. Could you just elaborate again on a couple of those? And while you're doing that, could you comment on the privacy issue of having to have employees declare?
I think the most serious technical issue, I think, is the one that I just mentioned, that there's just no threshold for when somebody can put a complaint in. They could just put it in with no evidence at all. And then the commissioner involved there has to take a decision as to whether to kind of launch an investigation. And as I was saying, it's pretty hard for them not to launch it, even though there's a may there once the thing is raised, because the only way they can get a public airing of the thing is to put something out. Now, as was just mentioned, I know that the way the general rules work for whether you can be involved in political activities changes with the level you're at. And to apply it to some officer in your office that, couldn't have had any effect on anything seems to be an unnecessary invasion of privacy. There are concerns generally about people's privacy being invaded, but people's privacy is often invaded for a good reason. I mean, MPs that are being investigated, for example. So it's always a balance. You have to have a good reason for impinging on privacy to do so. And, in all of these cases, there may not be a strong enough reason, in my view, but it depends.
Okay. Mr. Ferguson, in your opening remarks, you talked about each year every employee completes a conflict of interest declaration. And then at the end of that statement, you said any cases that give rise to a real or perceived threat to independence are reviewed by senior managers and the office's specialists for values and ethics. Have there been cases where this has arisen? And what kinds of things would that be?
We often have cases where employees come forward with a potential conflict. We may have employees who were employed in a given department who are now auditors with us. So we need to make sure that we're not putting them on auditing something that they were doing before. So when we are asking people about potential conflicts of interest, it runs the whole gambit. It's not just, political from that point of view. It's, is there any reason that you or a member of your family has a connection to the organization that you are auditing that could cause somebody to question your independence to act on this audit? And that's, we ask that not only, we ask that on every single audit we do before we start the audit.
And do you think that C-520 would complement what you're already doing, or do you think that it's going to make any difference with your audit?
In terms of, I think we manage conflicts of interest extremely carefully. I mean, our whole reputation is based on our independence, our objectivity, the way that we do our work. So we manage that extremely carefully. I suppose what this whole exercise does is, maybe tell us, make sure we are asking the question extremely specifically about partisan activity. But I'm more concerned that the bill itself could cause some opposite behavior, right? So, for example, now people will know that if they declare, that the information that they are declaring will be on the web. So that ends up disclosing an additional piece of information about them, which is where they are working right now, which otherwise would not necessarily be known that they are working at the Office of the Auditor General. Sorry.
To interrupt you there, you're well over time, Ms. Davidson. Thank you. For the last 4 minutes, we have Mr. Matthew Ravignac.
A real quick question for you, because we don't have a lot of time left, unfortunately. Just want to, maybe a simple yes or no answer would suffice on this one. Will this bill, or could this bill potentially decrease and reduce your independence?
I think the one danger here is that if a spurious, or well, a spurious most likely, complaint came in, it might disrupt proceedings that were underway. It may cast doubt on the decision maker, and so I think that's the most serious concern, I think, in this bill.
It may discourage people from seeking employment with our agencies, knowing that it could be subject to an examination that would be the topic of a report to Parliament without knowing very precisely from the legislation what would be the parameters of any such examination and what would be the extent of confidentiality in looking in those matters. I think that would be a concern for employees.
I don't think it would affect our independence, but I think the way that it is drafted now, there are some irritants that in it that it would cause that really aren't necessary and wouldn't help our independence.
Second very simple question. Could it potentially weaken existing rules in place, codes, acts with regards to definitions of partisan activity within your different offices?
It won't affect the way that we define these types of activities or the way that we manage conflict of interest. But I think, as I've said before, it raises some questions based on some things that are defined in other acts versus the way it's defined in this act. In this, so I think what it can do is just cause some confusion.
It's actually not defined. Sorry, it's actually not defined in this act, so I think it would have minimal impact on the other instances where there was a more fulsome definition.
Have either of your offices, or were your offices contacted prior to the drafting of this bill for advice or any form of consultation?
Nope.
No.
No.
J'aurais quelques questions.
I do have a few more questions. They're quite specific regarding the content of Bill C-520. And so I'll do that quickly. Do you know what kind of criteria would be used to determine whether or not an individual in an agent of Parliament's office was acting in a partisan manner or not in the carrying out of their responsibilities and duties? Is there even one criteria there? No, I think that's something that the committee has to look into. As we pointed out in our letter and in our remarks today, there is no definition or criteria in the bill regarding partisan conduct. Now, currently, we use the PSEA, we use our experience, and generally, we base that on political activities. Now, could there be non-political activities that could also be perceived as being partisan? That's one issue that actually is raised within the Section 9 of this bill.
It's the time we have for testimony and questioning. Thank you very much to the 3 agents of Parliament who made themselves available to us today. I remind committee members that submissions for future witnesses are to be in by end of business day today. And also I remind committee members that the meeting on Thursday is cancelled because of the address to Parliament of the Aga Khan. This meeting is adjourned.